We saw a huge problem with novel food products. One, they didn't meet price parity. Consumers unwilling to pay a premium for something that's perceived to be more sustainable. And then was taste. If I'm going to switch my regular bar of chocolates to something else, why would I switch to a brand that tastes worse? And we figured, why not try and solve these two problems in one shot? Let's use fermentation. We know that fermentation can scale. If we use the same technology to make it cheap, we know that fermentation solves the taste problem. It's historically used for millennia by the human civilization to create new flavors. And then we honed in on the ingredient that we saw had huge price and taste problem, and that is coffee. Climate change is wrecking coffee supply. At the same time, demand for coffee is expected to grow, especially in developing countries.
Welcome to Brave. Learn from Southeast Asia's best tech leaders. Build the future, learn from our past, and stay human in between. No BS on success. I'm Jeremy Au, venture capitalist, Sierra founder, Harvard MBA, science fiction nerd, and dad of 2 daughters. Every week, we debate startup news, interview changemakers, answer listener questions, and share personal insights. Join our movement of over 40,000 members and get transcripts, resources, and community at www.bravesea.com. Stay well and stay brave. You don't want to miss Geeks on a Beach, the unique premier startup conference in the region. Join us from November 13th to 15, 2024 at J Park Island Resort in Mactan, Cebu. This event brings together tech enthusiasts, investors, and entrepreneurs for 3 days of workshops, talks, and networking. Register at geeksonabeach.com and use code BRAVEC for a 45% discount for the first 10 registrations and 35% off for the next ones. Hey, DJ.
Hey, Jeremy.
Hey, I'm excited to have you. We've gone for many walks together and fantastic to see you take that plunge into the founder life.
Thanks for having me. Long-time listener, first-time caller.
And of course, I'm happy to introduce you as the Prince of Fermentation. I know we got to explain the story behind that. So definitely let's get started and talk a little bit about it. DJ, can you share a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, happy to. DJ here. I graduated with a degree in chemistry from UCL on an A-star scholarship. On graduation, I came back to Singapore. I worked in research. I started my career out in an organic synthesis laboratory. So there we were making chemicals for the specialty chemical industry, making larger molecules, more complex molecules from simpler chemicals. That was fun and all, but a part of me really wanted to look into food and see whether we could replicate some of this science to create flavors using chemistry. So after that, I moved on to work in a fermentation laboratory. So there we were using microbes to create flavors and fragrances. That really inspired me to want to look into fermentation. I started consulting for Michelin-star restaurants and bars here in Singapore, helping them develop new flavors, new dishes, new drinks, all based on fermentation. And of course, a year and a half ago, I started as co-founder and CTO of Prefer. We made coffee with our coffee beans.
So let's start from the beginning. Did you love science as a kid? I mean, because you did that undergrad degree, right? So I guess you must have, but how did you get into it? Were you into science?
I mean, I've always enjoyed science as a kid. I was always a regular member of the Singapore Science Centre, which I think it does amazing work in science communication. I was always reading science textbooks, even as early as primary school. Science was always sort of very natural to me, really understanding how the world works, how everything around us ticks and moves.
Amazing. And do you have any fun stories about you as a kid with science? Did your parents tell you any stories?
I think it's one of my earliest memories was joining the science club in primary school. And the school had a very interesting program where they allowed kids to really get in touch with botany and specifically orchids. So we learned how to cultivate orchids, learn how to pollinate orchids, learn how to learn aseptic techniques to grow orchid seeds into seedlings, and really learn all of that entire part of the life cycle. And I think also those early days that really got me interested in lab techniques in biology and chemistry.
Yeah, I remember my early days in a science club, and then I joined a computer club, the robotics club. Those were some fun times.
Yeah.
And what's interesting, of course, the difference between you and me is that you went on to decide to do an undergraduate degree in science, right, and chemistry. So what was your thinking back then?
I think I'll be honest, I probably wasn't thinking very much about my future or my career. All I knew was that I loved science. I knew that going to JC, and I was just looking forward to do more science, do more chemistry. A-Star offered a very generous opportunity. It was a scholarship to study abroad. And yeah, I got a place in UCL. I was like, hey, let's try and do chemistry there. And I think that's one of the more memorable years, not just the studying chemistry in UCL, but I think also getting to know fellow scholars, fellow geeks and nerds who are experts in their field of studies, chemistry, physics, and biology, medicine. And I think it's just incredible to be in the same room with folks of that energy and that level of passion about work.
Incredible. And what was it like as a Bachelor of Science. You could have been a bachelor as well. You probably were a bachelor as well.
Yeah,
In
yeah.
London, but obviously new country, you're getting specialized. What was it like?
I mean, London is London. It's a bit of a mini Singapore town over there. A lot of Singaporeans, a lot of Malaysians. So you almost feel at home in a foreign land. A great place to meet people, to get in touch with the community. What I really appreciate about my time in London, and this again was accidental back then, but in retrospect sort of makes sense, was that I got to live alone. I found a flat for my second and third year. And as I was living alone, I had to cook for myself. And as I was cooking for myself, I figured, why not try and apply some of this chemistry knowledge that I was learning in lectures and tutorials? Why not try and use chemistry to make my food taste better, to make it more nutritious? I saw that there were very clear links, correlations between what the experiments that we did in the lab and cooking. It's all the same thing. You're applying the heat, you're applying acids, you're applying amino acids and sugars, whether it's in the lab or in the kitchen. And that, I think, really got me started on learning more about food, learning more about science, learning more about food chemistry. And along the way, also really appreciating the culture, the tradition, the history, the social element of food and eating.
Oh, that's so true. I've always wanted a cookbook that was more scientific in the approach, right? Rather than add salt to taste and the kind of fuzziness there. No, I think it's really interesting. And then there you were, obviously, you went to A*STAR, which is the Singapore Science Organization here, and you did a whole set of different, I would say, practices and projects. Could you share a little bit more about the evolution?
Yeah, as part of the scholarship for graduation, I came back to Singapore. I worked in a research lab that was looking into organic synthesis and organic chemistry. Back then, my first thought, and what every other scholar thinks, is to pursue a PhD. And that was what I thought I would want to do, and just pursue a PhD in chemistry. For the longest time, I thought, oh, hey, food science, this food chemistry bit was fun, was cute, but it was just going to be a hobby or a side project. But only when I came back to Singapore, started talking to senior scientists, talking to mentors and advisors within the scientific community, that I really saw that there was a lot of emphasis and a lot of interest paid to food, and especially food in Singapore. I think that was also the time when the government was taking food security very seriously. And this was as early as 2016, 2017, so way before COVID. I remember attending an A*STAR-wide seminar once, and senior management was briefing us about the state of the industry. And a number still stays in my mind, and that was that the food industry in Singapore was mushrooming 30% year on year. And that's huge growth. And I thought, hey, maybe I could actually make a career out of this food thing. So I took what I learned in chemistry and I said, hey, let me try to work in food and flavors and fermentation. Let me get my feet wet, get my hands dirty, and pick up some more skills. And that was how I started really looking into flavors, fragrances, and pick up practical skills in biotechnology and fermentation.
Yep. And then I guess what's interesting here is that you decided to focus on that. What was the change there? What's the difference between sulfates and gas chromatography versus kind of like food as an application? How does that shift from your perspective?
Very little difference, actually. What I like about it is that in chemistry, experiments you do, you live in the lab. In food, experiments you do, you can eat, you can bring home. It's always fun to share your results with friends and family, right? Yeah, I think that was really the big shift. Like when I realized that I would go out networking events, I would talk to people about science and chemistry, quote unquote, which was my first love. And people just like nod along. They will politely follow along the conversation. And like, okay, I learned a new trivia today about chemistry. All right, that's it, move on. But when I talk about food resonates very differently with people. Food, I think, touches and hits an emotional core. It's sentimental. People have sometimes irrational feelings about food. People get surprisingly or unsurprisingly nationalistic and defensive about food. And I saw that I could talk about food and almost use food as a vehicle to talk about culture, use food to talk about science and chemistry. And that was fun. It was almost like an exercise in science communication for me.
And what's interesting is that during this time while you're still doing research at A*STAR, you had started your first consultancy gig as the co-founder of Starter Culture. Could you share more about that?
Yeah, so it started from my first ever ferment, and that was a red cabbage sauerkraut that I was making in the lab. So I went to the lab pantry and I made this kimchi, this sauerkraut. And what was interesting was you expect red cabbage to smell like red cabbage, like earthy, musty, sulfurous. But what came out of that was a almost blackcurrant, fruity aroma. And that to me was just amazing. It was almost like the black box that is fermentation, and how you could put something ingredient in and get something entirely different, entirely unexpected out of it. And that to me was exciting. And so I wanted to share that sort of magic and that mystery with folks. So my friends and I, we started taking projectors, speakers, mics down to Tiong Bahru Hawker Center. We would just stand there on a weekend morning and talk and deliver a lecture about kimchi. We'll talk about the science of kimchi. We'll talk about why you need to add X amount of salt, why you need to add X amount of sugar. We'll talk about the science of belacan. We even got a historian to come in and talk about the history of shrimp paste. So it really, or Southern culture really birthed itself just by talking about the science of food and trying to teach people, young adults, young families, aunties and uncles, the science of fermentation and try to dispel some of the pseudoscience that was surrounding it. And it was through those workshops that I think a couple of chefs and bartenders noticed us. They would attend our workshops, and after all, hey, this is actually quite informative. We are exploring fermentation in our menus. Why don't you come and teach a course, a class for the staff that really can better explain fermentation to the guests? And so we did. And then one thing led to another. I started reaching out to a couple of chef friends who run restaurants, bars, and a lot of these bars and restaurants are looking into novel, innovative dishes. But unfortunately, most of the staff do not graduate or aren't trained in the lab. They don't have science, engineering, math degrees and backgrounds. And so there was always this almost wall that prevented them from accessing information about science and fermentation. And I came in almost like a translator. So I'll read a scientific paper or a journal and basically just translate that to the kitchen staff. Hey, what this paper says is basically you just need to add 2% salt, and that 2% salt helps to inhibit spoilage, encourage the growth of your good bacteria. So that's been really fun, and I always get unique challenges, unique problems thrown at me. So it's always interesting to dive into the archives of the National Library to dig up old recipes to try and correlate or corroborate information across records and time spans.
I love that phrase you said, you always remember your first fermentation. Sounds like other people say, oh, I'll remember my first significant other.
Yeah.
My first man, my first woman, you're like my first fermentation. And you made that kimchi in the lab, right? Which is a bit different. A lot of people make it at home, you're making it in the lab.
Yeah. I mean, I think it was fun because in the lab, we had access to not just scientific equipment, but really scientific talent. Very, very smart chemists, analytical chemists, microbiologists who were in my workplace. So I think if something were to go wrong or go right, who better to ask than my colleagues? And why would I make it at home? Why not just make it in the lab so they can help me observe? And yeah, for a while, we would brew kombucha together, brew beer together, and really just encourage us to see fermentation beyond just 9 to 5 work thing, but also as a way of life. Hobby.
So what's so special about fermentation as a process? I mean, obviously we talk about chemistry, gas chromatography, and everyone's like, wow. Like you said, fermentation feels like something that everyone has been doing forever, right? Every Korean auntie, grandmother has been doing kimchi for generations.
Yeah.
I say sauerkraut, lachan as well. What's so special about fermentation from your perspective?
I like fermentation. I think it's interesting because it's actually a lazy person's approach to cooking. And I say it because also when I was doing organic chemistry work, I had to be the one assembling the chemicals. I had to be the one putting the chemicals together, mixing them under heat, stirring them. And I thought, why not let someone else or something else do the work? And that's what you find in fermentation. Right? You throw cabbage, salt together, and you basically just leave it there for a week. And you let the bacteria that's present naturally ferment, naturally break down the amino acids, the sugars, and convert them into flavor molecules. And yeah, 1 week later, come back after a holiday or a break, come back to it, and it's done. Almost like magic. It's really a lazy person's approach to it. You don't have to slave over a hot stove, stirring it, mixing it, waiting for it to be done. Just go do your own thing, come back to it, and it's almost magically done. And I think that's what the fun part about fermentation is. And that's something that I've had some problems when I was talking to folks at the hobby centers. Some of them like, I'm checking it every other minute. How do I know this? It's ready. I'm like, relax, set it there, forget about it, come back to it. If it's done, it's done. If it's not done, wait a bit longer. And if it's right, it's right. If it's wrong, toss it up, start again. It's a very, almost Zen approach, almost a very chill approach to food.
Isn't fermentation dangerous? I mean, there's bacteria, there's viruses, there's all these food handling issues. People get food poisoning. You're just throwing this and that, and then you're letting in fermentation. Like, how should I think about that?
Yeah, it can be dangerous if you don't know what you're doing. And that's why when we are teaching classes and workshops, we always start with safety. To me, it's important. It's more important that folks take away the why, the science of what we were doing when we were fermenting, rather than the specific numbers and ingredients in the recipe. People who always very interested in the recipe, I try not to spend too much time on it. Really, as long as you understand the science of it, you can basically do whatever you want, and there's quite a wide margin of error. And I think one of the beauty of fermentation is that, especially for someone if you regularly cook in the kitchen, if you know how to handle food and handle kitchen utensils, you are generally going to be okay. It's quite common sense. Wash your hands, wash your utensils. Yeah. If you're doing all that, you will be fine 90% of the time.
I mean, I guess people are worried about what if the wrong bacteria starts the fermentation process, right? I'm sure people are thinking about it all the time. Yeah. So how do you address that point?
One of the fun things about fermentation is that it almost self-checks. If you're making kimchi, you should expect at the end of it kimchi, right? You know how kimchi smells like, you know how kimchi tastes like. You should expect kimchi at the end of it. If you don't get kimchi, something has gone wrong. And then your nose is your GC, your tongue is your liquid chromatogram. Just by smelling it, you know that something's gone wrong, and you know not to taste it, you know not to eat it, you know not to serve it. So in a way, it tells you whether it's right, it tells you whether it's wrong. If it smells right, looks right, generally speaking, it's going to be quite okay. And what I recommend to folks is if you try a bit, try a small sample of it, you're not going to fall sick from it. And that will probably give you enough information to tell you whether you want to serve it to the rest of your friends. It's fun when your experiments tell you that whether things are going right or wrong. And you do that just by observing, just by using your senses and really paying attention to what's happening and what's changing.
So when you think about all of that, you also have the title now of the Prince of Fermentation, right? We've always laughed about it over the years. So how did you get that name?
Yeah, I was working with a friend who runs a Michelin restaurant, Labrid. So they do a modern take on Singaporean flavors and local ingredients. So I was doing quite a bit of work for him, helping him design nata de coco, helping him design other flavors, amazake, kombuchas. So one day, this journalist, also a friend now, May, went to the restaurant for lunch. And she was quite impressed, very intrigued by the ferments that our friend LG was implementing in the menu. And she wanted to find out more about the science of it. So she reached out and we spoke about what fermentation means to food, to the future of food and the history of food as well. And she was looking for a catchy headline or caption to tie it all together. And it just so happened that we were having this conversation in Friend's Cafe, and my friend who was the barista behind the counter, probably inspired by Japanese shonen manga titles and anime characters, like, hey, why not try Prince of Fermentation? Partly inspired by Prince of Tennis or other Japanese high school mangas. And May thought that it was a cute nickname and went with it, and hence the name stuck.
I'm sure. How does it because I've seen people introduce you with that title. I think you're used to it to some extent. But what's it like to walk around with that title?
I think the first few days were quite weird. It was a bit awkward. But I think that I've since grown to take it as almost like a badge of honor and admiration. I think, especially because I work with quite a few bars and restaurants, helping them, again, develop fermented dishes and ingredients. And so when people say that, yeah, it tells me that they are thinking about fermentation. They appreciate how fermentation is so key and integral to the food and everything around us. And I think it's nice that it helps with being more memorable. And so these days I kind of like it.
Amazing. And so what's interesting is that in parallel while you've been doing this, you've also decided to take the founder route, right? And we met because you were at Entrepreneur First, which is kind of like that founder training program. So could you talk a little bit more about your decision about why you decided to become a founder?
I think part of me was always a bit rebellious. Not in a bad way, I hope. But I think I also always liked the idea of building something for myself. I mean, I always like building models as a kid, Legos, growing up even today. So when the opportunity came for me to build my own business, I was like, yeah, why not give it a whirl? EF had been reaching out for, I think, a few cohorts before. I said, no, I'm an A-star. But I think the time that they reached out a year and a half ago was the time I was really thinking about what's next in life and career. And it happened to be a good time. All right, let's try and take a whack at it and see how it goes. And of course, I met Jake, and the rest is, as I say, it's history.
Yeah. I think what's interesting is that you met a co-founder and you also started working on the idea as well. Could you talk about that process?
I think, yeah, I mean, Jake is a great partner and co-founder. We came together with different ideas for what we wanted to bring to the table. He came from VC, where he was investing in food tech and climate tech. He has an MBA from Tel Aviv and NUS. He has a degree in neuroscience. So he really wanted to find a solution for the world's climate problems. I didn't care any about it. I just wanted to make food. I just wanted to make food that tastes good and was nutritious. I think where we really came together was looking at food as a lever for climate impact at scale. We figured, hey, everyone in the world eats food. If we could make the food that we eat, the lifestyle that we have, the habits that we consume, just a bit more sustainable, that could translate to huge impact multiplied by the world population. And then we went about looking at what was problematic or what issues in today's food ecosystem. We looked at nutrition, plant-based proteins, the hype and the trend a while ago. And we saw that a huge problem with these food products, novel food products, two things. One, they didn't meet price parity. So consumers aren't willing to pay a premium for something that's perceived to be more sustainable, or even if my chicken or my tofu costs X amount, any new product that wants to compete with that needs to cost X or less. Why would I pay more for something? Second was taste. If I'm going to switch my regular bar of chocolates to something else, to another brand, why would I switch the brand that tastes worse? And we figured, hey, why not try and solve these two problems in one shot? Let's use fermentation. We know that fermentation can scale. We can see how cheap soy sauce, beer gets. we believe that we use the same technology to make it cheap. And of course, we know that fermentation solves the taste problem. It's traditionally, historically used for millennia by the human civilization to create new flavors. And then we hold in on the ingredient that we saw had a huge price and taste problem, and that is coffee. Climate change is wrecking coffee supply, is eroding coffee farmland. At the same time, demand for coffee is expected to grow, especially in developing countries. Price problem, check. Taste problem, check. Coffee supply, coffee quality is impacted by extreme weather phenomena, floods, hail, typhoons, reducing coffee supply, reducing coffee quality. And figure, hey, why not try and use sustainable bioprocessors to create coffee flavor? And we spoke to a couple of prospective customers and clients. It got quite a lot of traction, and we figured this was something that we could double down on and start a company just to try and solve.
So I think the part that obviously people kind of have that question mark is, what's so bad about coffee anyway, right? I mean, coffee works. Coffee beans, put a bean in, you get a coffee out. Every Starbucks has it. So why do we need some sort of extract to put instead of a coffee bean?
I think coffee is hanging on by a thread today. Over the next couple of decades, climate scientists predict that coffee land will not be suitable to support agriculture and coffee growth. And that's just because of climate change. As the bean belt shrinks because of global warming, that prevents or inhibits the optimal growth of coffee and coffee cherries. Coffee supply is threatened. And it's not just also climate change. If you talk to coffee farmers on the ground, it's also labor. Younger generations that are brought up in farmland are moving to the city. Why would they want to pick up the hard jobs that their parents went through, tilling the farms, planting the seeds, when they could just move to the city, take a nice, comfortable office job, right, and make a living that way? People don't want to work on farms. Coffee farmers find that even if they were to work on farms, they rather plant a crop like durian, where they can fetch a higher value per harvest. Coffee harvests are also twice annually. And you don't make a lot. So all these factors together are threatening coffee supply. So while today we may still see coffee prices somewhat stable because they are traded on futures on the commodities market, but in a few years, as these shock waves propagate through the market and through the supply chain, we'll start to see coffee prices increase. We'll see either coffee prices increase or coffee quality becoming something that we're not quite used to. And our hunch at Prefer is that we need to find a solution today and not wait for the problem to be too real or too big to solve.
What are the challenges in fermenting and creating a coffee-like product?
The first challenge really is the taste problem. How you replicate the genuine, authentic sensory experience, right? Again, food is not pure science. It's an art, and it's tied to a lot of emotions. So when we think of coffee, we think of the moments in someone's life or someone's day when you would drink coffee. For some folks, when I was in London, the first thing I did when I woke up was turn on my coffee grinder. So you get the aroma of freshly ground coffee wafting through the entire apartment. And that, I think, is a unique sensory experience. And of course, there is tied to a lot of emotion. How do you replicate that? It's something that's not coffee. For us, we use bread, we use soy, we use barley, we ferment these ingredients. And we ferment these ingredients to get the same aroma molecules that you will get in coffee. And that, we think, is our best approach to mimicking on a chemical molecular level the exact profile of coffee.
And obviously there's a flavor component. And I think that's interesting because we saw that for Impossible Meat, right? Where they have managed to, I'll say, pretty much replicate the taste of a burger patty, I would say. But of course, one of the challenges they have now is that, I'll say, the form factor, the distribution, the price. I mean, it all comes together on one side. And of course, the consumer also doesn't find it to be as healthy, as very processed. So how do you think about this for free coffee?
I think the beauty of gluten-free coffee for Prefer, at least, it's fermented in a way that you would naturally see food being fermented. We use food-grade microbes, we use beer tanks, we use soy sauce vats, and it's as simple as fermentation. We ferment the ingredients and then we roast it like you would roast coffee. So it's minimally processed, if you want to think about it that way. And at the end of it, it comes out in a form that looks like ground coffee. So it's very familiar to folks who drink coffee. We've done blind tests where we pass it to baristas, and they instinctively know how to use the ground coffee. They will scoop it out, they'll put it in the portafilters, they'll pull a shot of it. And so it needs minimal training, minimal equipment, no specialized equipment. And I think that makes it very approachable and very easy to use.
Great to hear that the usage is actually effectively one-to-one. How does it compare, you think, in price over time?
I mean, today we are matching coffee prices. So I think that bodes well for us, and that tells us that we are on the right track using fermentation as a scalable technology to approach the problem. But over time, we believe that in order for Prefer to make a real impact in the supply chain and in the food ecosystem, we need to be more affordable. And we believe that we can get there by next year.
Yeah, I mean, it's to scale more and you can scale that. It's easier to
Yeah,
scale.
it's a simple scaling problem. When you look
Yeah.
at how cheap yogurt can be, how cheap beer can be, we believe that we'll get there.
But yeah, you can scale that faster than you can scale like coffee plantations. Yeah, for sure. What's the caffeine kick like?
Yeah. The product is decaf by default. So if you don't want caffeine, you're allergic to any bit of caffeine, Prefer is perfect. For folks who want caffeine, we buy caffeine powder off the shelf and we scoop it in. So that allows us to control the exact dosage of caffeine that you want. If you want 30 milligrams, 70 milligrams, we can get that exact amount in.
Great. So I think what's interesting is that as you think through all of that, could you share about what are some of the myths or misconceptions, I guess, about bean-free coffee?
Misconceptions. I think some folks think that we use spent coffee and they wonder why go through all this, jump through all this hoops just to use coffee again. And we don't use spent coffee. I think the goal is to move away from any ingredient or any byproduct that would be threatened by climate change. So the goal is to avoid using any coffee byproduct or coffee derived ingredient and really rely on ingredients that are accessible, like bread, like soy, like barley. The other misconception, I think, is not just about bean-free coffee, but about Prefer. People think that we are a coffee company. In truth, we are not. Really, we see ourselves as a flavor company. The ultimate goal of Prefer is to create flavors for the world's ingredients that are threatened by climate change. Today, it's coffee, it's cacao, it's vanilla, it's hazelnut. We want to be able to use our fermentation technology, our bioprocesses, to create coffee flavors. But also, can we create chocolate without cacao? Can we create pot-free hazelnut? So pot-free vanilla, can we create nut-free hazelnut? All based on the same platform technology that is fermentation. So we are starting with coffee to prove that this works. But those ingredients are things on our horizon.
I think it's interesting because a lot of these flavors have already been developed by kind of like food scientists at CPG, consumer packaged good companies, right? Obviously, a Pringles has, I think there's probably like 100 flavors right now. So those food scientists are already creating those flavors. Same thing for your chocolate wafers, like that. So how do you see yourself differentiated from that? Is it primarily because you're an independent team selling to small and medium distributors? Is that one big difference?
I think one key difference is the process. So synthetic flavors, artificial flavors, or nature identical flavors have been around for very long, as you will probably point about, even coffee flavors. Right? So coffee flavoring in itself is not unique. I think our approach to making coffee flavors, sustainable food grade sources is different. And this is especially important for consumers interested in clean labeling. It's not interesting to corporations who want to avoid using petrochemical feedstock in their synthesis and want to find a carbon neutral or even carbon negative approach to creating flavors. The other thing I think is interesting is the application. So while you can get liquid coffee flavoring and those work very well for ready to drink beverages and packaged goods, it's been challenging, I think, to embed those flavors in a solid form factor and a powder that will work just like coffee bean, that will work just like ground coffee. We have that. So our customers today, again, put it in they put it in the cafeterias, they put it in their mocha pots, and they brew it as they brew coffee. And I think just being able to open that application, that form factor really opens up a lot of opportunities for bean-free coffee.
And then from that perspective, could you share about a time that you personally have been brave?
I think that's a very interesting question. I don't think I was brave back then when I made the decision. Back then, found someone else would see it as reckless abandon. But today, on hindsight, I think I was brave when I chose not to pursue a PhD. A lot of talented ASA scholars pursue the PhD as it almost seems natural. For me, I had to wrestle with that guilt for the longest time. It was childhood me's bucket list to do a PhD, to become a professor and just teach chemistry. But I think I saw that there was a very real time-sensitive opportunity to pursue a career in food science, and that required me to start working in the industry immediately and not spend 5 years almost siloed away in academia working on studying one specific problem. And I think it's that decision to move away from PhD that ultimately led me here to where I am today.
Amazing. On that note, I'd love to kind of like summarize the 3 big takeaways that I got from this conversation. First of all, thank you so much for sharing about your early science and academic career in terms of how you were as a student, how much you love science, and what were the early decisions you make as a student. Secondly, thank you so much for sharing about fermentation, especially about the science and the process, and about how you fell in love with fermentation, how you set out your kimchi and your kombucha and your beer, but also doing that while you were at A-Star as a scientist. So fascinating to hear that story as well. And lastly, thank you so much for sharing about your decision to become a founder and your vision for Prefer bean-free coffee, and just kind of answering it from two different angles, right? One from what is it like from a consumer perspective about why they should drink it, why they can use it at home, why they can brew a cup of coffee as they normally would. And secondly, from the perspective of a founder, right? We're just talking about go-to-market, talking about how you're making it something that's positive in terms of the climate, making it positive in terms of packaging, and seeing yourself primarily as a flavors company rather than coffee. So on that note, thank you so much, DJ, for sharing your story.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to Brave. If you enjoyed this episode, please share the podcast with your friends and colleagues. We would also appreciate you leaving a rating or review. Head over to www.bravesea.com for member content, resources, and community. Stay well and stay brave.